We're in. Hi, good day.
Hi, guys.
Okay, so we're in. Adrian will come in a moment. And
Oh, no problem. So, Nadita, I'm just making you the co-host, right?
yes.
You and Adrian. Okay, great. Do you guys want me to share the flyer screen in the meantime, or do you want to leave it as is?
No, you can share the flyer,
The flyer?
now.
Okay, no problem.
So I'm just enabling the participants and the panelists to share.
Sure. Which one is this boy? Okay. Just confirming you guys seeing the flyer, right?
Yes. Well, I'm seeing your screen still.
Hi.
Hi, good day, everyone.
Good day. Are you all seeing the flyer?
You see the folder with the flyer?
Oh, that's odd. Okay, just 1 second. Are you seeing it now?
No. The share has stopped.
Okay. Now?
Yes, but not in full screen. But yes, we are seeing the flyer large.
Okay.
Afternoon, Mr. Alexander. How are you?
I'm fine. And yourself?
You have, well, based on the amount of persons that have registered, we will have literally a full house.
Okay, great.
We're seeing over 170 registered persons.
Okay. Well, I see they're now starting to come in. I see the attendees on 18. I wasn't sure if they would be in the same Zoom or separate. I wasn't sure how the actual interaction would work.
Not sure myself how it's being done. We'll see.
Okay.
I assume they're not hearing us.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dr.
Afternoon, Lisa.
Afternoon.
Yeah, I can hear everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone. We will just wait 2 more minutes for the participants to join.
Sure, Nadita, you let me know when you want me to stop sharing.
Okay.
Thanks. We will share the screen in a few minutes.
Sure.
Hey guys, we can only see ourselves. We can't see who the participants are.
No, we could just see their listing. They could hear and I believe see us also. But I know they could hear us. I'm not sure if they could see us.
Yeah, they could see you guys once your camera is on.
Okay.
You're recommending we keep the cameras on while the presentation goes on?
Well, the presentation will go to full screen, right? Hello?
Yeah, it would, once you share on your screen, it will go to full screen. You may see the panelists minimized in the corner of the screen.
Understood.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome all the participants to our webinar on good agricultural practices, building competitiveness in the agricultural sector. We will have the welcome remarks from Mr. Derek Lookbat, the Executive Director of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards. Mr. Lookbat.
Thanks, Tadita. Good afternoon, all. Very encouraging to see quite a large and varied group. I expect others will join shortly. I'm privileged to welcome you to this webinar on good agricultural practices, which is a collaborative effort between the National Agricultural Marketing and Development Corporation, NAMDEVCO, the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, ICA, the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, as well as our line ministry, Ministry of Trade and Industry, as well as the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association. We're certainly pleased to be part of this year's Virtual Trade and Investment Convention 2020, organized by the TTMA. On behalf of our Board of Directors and the management of TTBS, I would like to express sincere appreciation to all stakeholders for attending this virtual session. This event is one of 3 webinars, which is part of the implementation of the National Quality Policy 2018-2030 in collaboration with the Ministry of Trade and Industry. One of the key areas of the NQP is supporting improved competitiveness in the manufacturing and agricultural sectors. The growth of the agricultural and agro-processing sector is also a central theme of the recent Trinidad and Tobago Trade Policy 2019 to 2023. This webinar will highlight the requirements of the national standard TTS 648-2020, which is Good Agricultural Practices GAP, fresh produce requirements, and provide a forum for the panelists to discuss the importance of building and assuring food safety and quality for the primary production of fresh produce and the role of this national standard in improving the competitiveness of our agricultural sector. From a production standpoint, agriculture in our country is predominantly small scale, employing less than 3% of the population and contributing under 1% to GDP. In addition, local producers experience challenges with competition from cheaper foreign imports, as well as difficulty in accessing export markets. In the nation's roadmap for Trinidad and Tobago post-COVID-19 pandemic report, there is a major focus on the development of the local agriculture sector, with some of the key objectives of ensuring food security and taking key policy decisions to aggressively boost the sector. Therefore, this national standard for GAP is an effective platform to increasing production and building a more technologically advanced and climate resilient agriculture system so as to support a more value-based competitive industry. TTS 648, the National GAP Standard, was developed at the request of NAMDEVCO, which is charged with the mandate for the efficient marketing of agricultural produce and food products through the provision of marketing services and the stimulation of business investment in the agro-industrial sector of Trinidad and Tobago. This national standard project, which is intended to assist in achieving national economic development and sustainability, was prioritized by both organizations as a key strategic deliverable. While we do acknowledge that there are a number of challenges being faced by our local farming community, such as ready access to water, predial larceny, land acquisition and ownership, and the more recent COVID-19 pandemic, we believe that a real window of opportunity has been presented for a collective, collaborative, and coordinated approach to the development of our local agriculture sectors. Taking deliberate and effective advantage of this opportunity will undoubtedly reap the socioeconomic rewards in the short, medium, and long term, noting that the application of this national GAP standard is one of the foundational elements necessary to build quality into the sector. We take this opportunity to recognize Ms. Numala Devi Singh Prasad, the CEO of NAMDEVCO, who has been a champion for quality in the agricultural sector and an active proponent for the application of standards and quality systems in our local industry. Today, she is represented at this webinar by Mr. Christopher Alexander, their Quality Assurance Manager. I would also like to highlight the role of ICA on agriculture. They have been an invaluable technical resource and played an instrumental role in developing this national GAP standard. We recognize Dr. Lisa Harinanan from ICA, who is a well-known expert in food safety nationally and regionally, as well as the chair of the TTBS's specification committee responsible for the development of this national GAP standard. We also have Ms. Adrienne Stewart, who is the standards officer responsible for this project, to highlight the key aspects of this standard. She has extensive experience in national, regional, and international standardization. She has worked in quality management for both the fresh produce export and food manufacturing sectors. She serves as a technical secretary for the GAP Specification Committee and has training and knowledge in GAP, food safety, GMPs, Global GAP, FDA, FSMA, and USDA PSR. This close collaboration with the private sector, with organizations such as TTMA, the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce, and farmer organizations is also critical in the development of our agricultural sector and the application of this national GAP standard. We need to ensure that our local producers can meet national, regional, and international standards to increase penetration to the US, EU, and other international markets, especially as we seek to rebuild our economy post-COVID-19. We firmly believe that standards are tools that foster innovation, quality, and sustainability, and offer an avenue by which we can improve the local agricultural sector. In this regard, the conversation on GAP training and certification is a top priority for our national stakeholders to ensure the effective implementation of the national standard and to realize the objective of assuring food quality and safety. So in closing, I wish all of you the best with today's session, and we look forward to your active contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lookbat. So you have basically introduced our panelists, and we will move straight ahead into our presentations. First, we have the role of IECA and the significance of the national GAP standard in building and ensuring food safety and quality for primary production of fresh produce. And this will be done by Dr. Harnanan, who has had a long history with working with TTBS on food and agriculture standards. So without further ado, I'll turn you over to Lisa to deliver her presentation. So just one moment while she shares her screen. And while we wait on Lisa to start her presentation, I will just mention that any questions can be asked using the Q&A button. We also have the chat function, so I will be monitoring the chat for today's session. And if there are questions that we can answer live, we will use the Q&A to do so. So please take the opportunity to ask any questions. We will have longer panel discussions where we will take the questions and have our panelists answer them directly here. So thank you, and I'll turn you over to Lisa.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Lisa. You may need to click the slideshow button.
I did, but it closed it back. Okay, so let me do it again. Okay. And here. All right, so I think you can see me now. Good?
Yes.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Nadita, for the introduction. And thank you, Mr. Lakpat, for your kind words of introduction as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from hot, sunny Trinidad and Tobago, from wherever you may be. And greetings from ICA on behalf of the representative for the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation and Agriculture delegation in Trinidad and Tobago, Ms. Diane Francis. So as Narita introduced me, I am Lisa Harinanan. I'm the Agriculture Health and Food Safety Specialist with the ICA office in Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, so the role today for ICA is the role of ICA and the significance of the national GAP standard in building and assuring food safety and quality for primary production of fresh produce. And so you'll realize that why we are here for the GAP for the good agricultural practices in building competitiveness in the agricultural sector. And so what's our role, ICA's role in all of this? So the presentation agenda, what do we do? Technical cooperation program, institutional collaboration, what's next, any other GAP related activities? What do we do? So ICA. So ICA is a specialized agency of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation and Agriculture. ICA supports the efforts of its 34 member countries in Latin America and the Caribbean to achieve agricultural development and rural well-being and overcoming challenges and achieving their SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Or technical cooperation program. So what is ICA role and the relationship with the agriculture sector in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean? ICA works directly with ministries of agriculture, providing technical cooperation through 4 strategic objectives to increase agriculture's contribution to economic growth and sustainable development, to contribute to the well-being of all rural dwellers, to improve international and regional trade for countries in the region, as well as to increase resilience of rural areas and agri-food systems to extreme events. So Our technical cooperation programs, so you will see the strategic objectives a while ago, and therefore these reflect ICA's 5 technical cooperation programs, which are these. So we have 5 technical cooperation programs and 2 cross-cutting teams. So you realize that the cross-cutting teams transcends all 5 programs. So in bioeconomy and production development, territorial development and family farming, international trade and regional integration, climate change, natural resources and risk management, agricultural health, safety, and food quality. And the 2 cross-cutting teams would be the gender and youth and innovation and technology. And today our program is focusing on the agricultural health and food safety, safety and food quality, and therefore, so we're directly looking at the agricultural health, food safety, and quality program. So integrated in all 5 programs are the important cross-cutting teams, and you can bear with me and understand that when we talk about agricultural practices, we talk all of these 5 programs as well as the cross-cutting teams. And as we go throughout the program today, with the other 2 presenters, you'll see and understand when I say all 5 programs, they are somehow related towards agricultural practices. So institutional collaboration, what do we do? So our collaboration spans virtually all eco-technical programs, and we would have had many areas of collaboration with these listed here, and entities in the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Land, Ministry of Agriculture, Land, Fisheries, and such entities, of course, NAMDEFCO being one of the main ones, the Agriculture Development Bank, the Cocoa Development Company, the Ministry of Health, Chemistry, Food and Drug Division specifically, Veterinary Public Health, the Public Health Inspectorate, Ministry of Trade and Industry, Curry, TTBS, of course, which we are here today, TTMA, Export TT, some of our NGOs are the Cropper Foundation, the Alliance for Rural Communities, Trinidad and Tobago, the Y Farm, and the Network of Rural Women. Some of our regional partners, collaborators are UWI, CARDI, CAFR, and our international partners, collaborators, FAO, PAHO, CABI, USD, APHIS. And of course, these are only some, but these are the main ones that we work with more on a regular basis. And of course, we cannot forget our communities, our groups, our MSCs, our micro and small enterprises, and of course, many more. So what have been ICA contributions towards the GAPs? So you'll see this picture here is some of the members of the GAP committee, our very first meeting, I think this was. In moving forward, we'll see that for the GAPs, supporting the development of a local GAP standard, NAMDEFCO being key, and one of the activities we would have done and collaborated on, ICA-TT would have supported NAMDEFCO on a study tour to Costa Rica to expose the NAMDEFCO staff to the experiences of the countries with which they have a successful GAP program, referred to as TICO GAP, and you'll hear a little bit more about that, I think, from Mr. Alexander's presentation. So that was one area that we did in the very beginning before the GAP started. So taking those experiences would have helped in moving how we had the process for the GAP. So NAMDEFCO continued the engagement with us, with ICA and TTBS and the key stakeholder agencies to develop the GAP, and the main collaborators for the specification committee was CURI, the Ministry of Health, FAO, EMA, the Ministry, Research and Planning Division, Farmers Organization, ESTT, and of course our colleague from THA. So, so ICA's role is being the chair of the specification committee, as you would have already heard from the CEO of TTBS, for the development of the GAP standard, and that was already made reference to, and the GAP referring here to fresh produce requirements. Now, note that we say fresh produce requirements, so that there might be other commodities that will have to be looked into further. So this is only taken into the fresh produce requirements. But TTBS, when Adrian makes a presentation, she will give you a little bit more on that. So this is some further collaboration between ICA and NAMDEFCO and the produce safety rule, the FSMA or the FDA, Food Safety Modernization Act. So ICA provided some support to a number of farmers, stakeholders, institutions, support agencies. So ICA and NAMDEFCO collaborated to export TT to provide some of that training to farmers and processors. They all receive a certificate from the Association of Food and Drug Officials, and the course provided a foundation of gaps. Now we may ask, well, how does this collaborate or transcend with our good agriculture practices that we're speaking about presently? So the good agriculture practices are basically the same areas that you go through. It's just that the Food Safety Modernization Act or the FDA would have certain criteria that you must meet in exporting fresh produce to the US. And fresh produce, we mean fresh produce that are considered raw agricultural commodities. So these are the ones that do not go through a cook step. So you wash, you sanitize, and then it gets to your plate. So some of our further collaborators, and this one is a very important one with Cropper Foundation, an NGO, and this is led by the CEO, Umar Mohammed. And so we have had a number of initiatives going forward with the Cropper Foundation, and I'll just briefly mention some of them. So the Cropper Foundation is funded by IDB funded project, and one of the projects is Making Agriculture Profitable and Sustainable. It's called the MAPS project, and this is intended to support the widespread adoption of climate smart agriculture in Trinidad and Tobago, by helping to drive changes in practices from both the demand side, consumer side. And so when we say demand consumer side, meaning that consumers now are driving the demand for safer food, quality food, and then through branding and consumer and communication. And then we also have from the supplier side, making the process easier for farmers to access and understand more sustainable and climate smart practices. And all of this ties in directly to the GAP. Coming out at the end of this is a grow brand, a consumer brand, and it's referred to as the GSCP, which the name you may have known before was has now changed to the Grow Safe Cultivation Program, and not the Grow Safe Certification Program, but since it does not go through a rigorous process as what we'll consider a certification. So it's a branded produce and it is sold in the Massey stores. So that is the whole arrangement between the Massey stores and the Cropper Foundation for taking the farmers' produce that is in this program to go to the supermarket. So further coming up, there's continuing some work with cucumbers, some testing with cucumbers, so it should be on the shelf soon. And 2 other crops that is in the pipeline are pak choy and sweet peppers, and those are for testing sometime in November. So some of the activities undertaken through this project, and I'll go through very quickly, meetings, and the collaborators here, ICA, NAMDEFCO, Query, Ministry of Health, some of endless meetings, lots of meetings with all the stakeholders, with all the collaborators, a number of meetings. We survey of farmers, the sampling protocol, the testing, what capabilities, the lab testing capability for the pesticide residue, the query to the screen that the project required, and therefore a lab is sought outside of Trinidad for that. The field officers of NAMDEFCO rigorously working with the farmers arrangement protocol, pack house arrangement, the produce taken from the farmers go to the pack house where it is washed, sanitized, packaged, and ready for distribution. Then the payment system, the massive distribution system, packaging, branding, communication. So all of this, and so you'll see some photos here that a number of areas that would have taken place. So this is a nice photo that I got from the Cropper Foundation. So a number of areas you see here that the farmers need to go through. Water quality is very key in the gaps, which you will hear in a while. The produce itself, testing, sampling, and all of that are indeed a big part of gaps. So for this project, there's pesticides that are tested. So farmers have to go through a program. You only write the program recommend class 3 and class 4 pesticides. If you use pesticides outside of that, and when the testing is done, the MRLs will show up as pesticides outside of what the project recommend, and therefore the farmers could get kicked out of the program. And the other testing would have done was microbiological testing. One of them would definitely be E. coli, and if you have gotten, and if tests return positive with E. coli, therefore you know one of the main culprits would have been the water source. So some other projects, ongoing projects happening right now, a national pesticide database. So the CROP is providing some funding to the Ministry of Health for a pesticide database. And why I'm saying this, because all of this is going to be tied in back to the Good Agricultural Standard as once it starts roll out. And there's also a digital market platform for fresh produce and processed agro products. This is ongoing with NGO farmers organizations. A model farmers program for climate smart agriculture. This is also ongoing one, now in the developing stages. And the final one is a farmers mobile app. And this one is definitely going to be a big plus for farmers, as it is hoped that farmers will be able to have better records. And we know how farmers don't like to keep records. So record keeping is a key here. Being able to use your mobile device and then put your records. If you don't have access to internet at the same time, there's going to be some form of a cloud where it will be stored, and then when you get your internet connection, you will be able to download it. And of course, it's a major thing for traceability. So this is the mobile app, the mobile project that is ongoing. So ICA is a big part in this going forward. So the consultant is going to be starting the project. One of the consultants is going to be starting the project soon. So what's ICA's, what's the next other GAP related projects that ICA is working on or have worked on? So there's an e-learning platform, and that's a website for it. In the e-learning platform, there is a course that is now up on the e-learning site. It's getting ready to export agri-food products. It's at a minimal cost of $50 US, but if you go on right now, you get a discount. Not that I'm advertising, but I'm telling you, it's a good course and getting ready to export. So it goes for fresh produce as well as processed foods. And there's this other one too. There's a big app, and for some of you who would have done the training, it's a 6-module training, very easy to understand, a lot of graphics. It's done by BIA, and you get a certificate at the end. It does give you some really good information going forward, as very, very similar to what this GAP standard criteria is. There's another upcoming collaboration from the Export TT and the Canada, our ICA Canada office, and the Canada, the CFIA, which is the Canadian Food Safety Agency. This webinar is going to be on November 12th, and if anybody interested, well, you can contact Export TT for registration, or registration is ongoing. Right, so this is one that we're looking forward to, and it's going to be both on processed foods as well as fresh produce. In continuing the role of the GAP, as for this present GAP, this GAP standard. So, and in terms of the specification committee, what are some of the follow-up? We have to complete the guidance documents. There's a grades and standards document for completion, to assist with training, and to assist with the rollout of the standards in the farming community. Right. So this is just my role as chair of the certification committee, and I'm working along with all the collaborators. So I want to say a big thank you to all the collaborators who would have worked on this GAP standard so far to get us up to this stage, and we can be very proud of ourselves. We do actually have a GAP standard that is out for publication. And I want to thank TTBS and TTMA for giving us the opportunity to be on this platform today. I think it's indeed a momentous occasion, being that we are COVID restricted. So thank you again. And any questions, you can find me at, okay, the L out of my ISA is missing. So it's lisa.harina@iica.int. All right, thank you guys.
Thanks, Lisa. So you have basically set the platform for our next presentation and really highlighted that, achieving the gap requirements is possible. So I would like to welcome now Ms. Adrienne Stewart. So she was the standards officer from Standardization Division that actually worked on the standard with the entire committee. And she will give an overview of our national standard for gap. So I'll turn it over now to Adrienne. So she will be sharing her screen shortly.
Okay, thank you, Nadita. Let me just share my screen here. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I'm going to just give an overview of the national standard for good agricultural practices for fresh produce. And this standard encapsulates fresh produce, of course, with fruits, vegetables, herbs, those kinds of products. The standard does not speak to livestock production at all. And I just wanted to make that clear because I know that sometimes that's a question that comes up, but the standard does not address livestock. It's strictly for fresh produce. There are, however, gap standards for livestock production, but that's another step in the process. All right, so what are we going to talk about this afternoon? We're going to talk about the gap context, gap principles. We're going to look at the principles on which gap is built, current context of gap. We're going to look at the standard and some of the technical requirements of the standard. And then I will conclude with just looking at a few of the benefits and how implementation of gap fosters competitiveness. So without further ado, just let's open the door to some further insight. All right. So in 2018, as a component of the development of the National Standardization Strategy, the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, TTBS, undertook a national standards survey. When stakeholders responded to this survey, many of them identified the need for a good agricultural practices standard. So to action this request, we met with NAMDEVCO to discuss the way forward. At this point in time, NAMDEVCO had embarked on a multi-approach project to improve on-farm and post-process practices for produce safety and quality. A specification committee was convened with representation from farmer groups, public and private agencies, labs, and this was chaired by Dr. Lisa Harinan from ICA, as was previously mentioned, and as you just met Dr. Harinan. The national standard, which is voluntary in its application, was developed with reference to several other standards and regulations on GAP. We looked at the Asian GAP, the Canadian GAP, the USDA GAP, the Siri GAP, Japan GAP, Jamaica GAP, Global GAP. And we look at the US produce safety rules as well. And all of these elements, and there are lots more documents that we looked at to ensure that the standard that was developed for our national need, did meet what the objectives that we wanted it to meet. So the standard is aligned to the strategic level objectives outlined in the National Quality Policy 2018-2030. It also meets the objectives of the National Food Safety Policy 2018 to 2023 and the Trinidad and Tobago Trade Policy 2019 to 2023. The standard is meant to address a number of issues because standards address a problem. Standards are one solution to a problem. So what is it that we're trying to address? We're trying to improve the safety of fresh produce offered for sale in Trinidad and Tobago. We do believe that our consumers, that our nationals are worthy of fresh produce, which is safe, which is healthy for them. Trinidad and Tobago, as with other countries in the region, have a high incidence of non-communicable diseases, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease. And this part of our population is trying to eat healthier, and we want to ensure that the food that they eat is healthy. With COVID, we have consumers who are boosting their immunity, boosting their immune response systems, and they're using a variety of herbal teas and potions and so on in order to make use of the vitamins and the antioxidants which are present in them. We want to ensure that those persons who are doing so, persons who are trying to just eat healthy just because for eating healthy sake, are doing so, and that the food is healthy for them to consume. The standards are meant to specify where measures need to be put in place to reduce or eliminate hazards, biological hazards, microbes, E. coli, salmonella, to name a few, eliminate or reduce physical hazards, strings, pieces of vegetable trash, stone, glass, metal, or so on in packaging of fresh produce, and of course, chemical hazards. Pesticides is obvious, but there may be heavy metals from fertilizers, there may be contact from non-food grade cleaners, so the standard is meant to ensure that those measures which eliminate or reduce these kinds of contacts or uptake by fresh produce are put in place. We also want to be able to access new markets or obtain an expanded share of a market or a segment of a market. Application of the standard assists in this and builds a good reputation for Trinidad and Tobago produce in the export market. And just to point out that the standard, as I said before, is in line with some of the policies that we have nationally, right? So we want to enhance our reputation. We want to ensure that there is positive feedback from our export markets that buy our produce. And when we build a reputation, our produce will be seen as premium produce, and GAP can assist in achieving that. So let's look at our imports and exports for fruit and vegetables. These are figures from the Central Statistical Office, 2018-2019. And the exports we can see are, okay, I've just been told that my volume is a little bit low. I think I am on maximum volume here. So let me just come a little closer to the computer. All right. So our exports and imports and exports of our fruits and vegetables for 2018-2019, we can see that our exports are approximately in 2018, our exports went up a little bit, which is good, but we can also see that when you look at it, it's still about a quarter of our imports. So we're seeing that there is room for improvement here. Our exports are approximately 0.38 of all exports from Trinidad and Tobago, that is fresh fruits and vegetables. 2019, it was 0.58% of all exports out of Trinidad and Tobago. So there is potential for growth for our fresh fruits and vegetables, and especially to our traditional markets like the USA and Canada. But we have to note that in the last 5 years or so, these export markets have put in stricter requirements for imports, and GAP is now a key way of ensuring that we can meet some of these requirements in these export markets. So we've been saying a lot about GAP, good agricultural practice, but what exactly is GAP? It's a collection of principles, standards, technical recommendations that apply to on-farm production on through to post-production processes, resulting in safe and healthy food and non-food agricultural products as well, while taking into account economic, social, and environmental sustainability. And let me just make a plot. Non-food agricultural products would speak to stuff like if you're making compost from your plant trash, you also want to ensure that that is safe for use. So we can see that GAP is not just about reducing pesticides or using clean water alone or having fertilizer management practices put in place. GAP is a little bit wider than that. It takes into consideration economic, social, and environmental factors as well. So much so that in some countries, GAP is legislated, that is, it is a law, and as such, all producers have to comply to it. And GAP is based on 4 principles, basically. And these are worker well-being, food safety and quality, environmental protection, and economic sustainability. Countries can build GAP programs on all these 4 principles, or they can build GAP programs on the outcome that they want to achieve. So for example, you can have a GAP program that may focus on improving the environment because there's extensive soil degradation or deforestation. And so those elements of the GAP program would be a greater focus than to say, let's say food quality. All right, so it depends on what the country wants to do, but generally, most countries tend to have a very balanced GAP between all 4 principles. So in order to act on the GAP principles, a standard is needed that will specify the requirements of the GAP. Unless the requirements are written, no one will know what they're supposed to be doing. And therefore, if you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, then you cannot adhere to the requirements, right? So a standard is a document that provides technical specifications or other precise criteria to be used constantly as rules, guidelines, or definitions of characteristics to ensure materials, products, processes, services are fit for their intended purpose. Now, a standard is a formal document which is established by consensus and published by a recognized body. So the standard was established by consensus. We had a specification committee in place. We have a steering committee through NAMDEVCO in place. We did public consultations and we got a lot of feedback and changes were made in the document. The document was improved so that it fits the requirements for Trinidad and Tobago. And it has been published by a recognized body, which is the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, and has a mandate for publishing standards in the country. So the standard is TTS 648 2020 because it's been published this year. It was approved this year. Good agricultural practices, fresh produce requirements. So requirements for fresh produce for agricultural practices, right? It establishes minimum requirements of good agricultural practices for fresh produce. Of course, we've said this, inclusive of fresh fruits, vegetables, herbs, spices, and root crops. At production, harvesting, post-harvest handling, packaging, storage, or transportation stages, and were offered for sale or supply for direct consumption or further processing. So you see, it really runs the gamut from farm to fork. It relates as much to the producer or farmer as it does if you are operating a packing house. Not all the requirements will be the same, of course, for a farmer as it would be for a packing house. Now, the standard is generic. That is, it applies to all farms, packing facilities, production, regardless of if you have different production system, regardless of if you have different sizes or complexity within your production facility. The standards the standard allows only for minimally processed foods. That is, foods that are not going through anything more than cleaning, removing of trash, you know, no peeling, no juicing, nothing like that. The fruits and vegetables are still recognizable as fruits and vegetables, but you may have some packing to do, you may have cleaning to do, you may have to remove trash and so on, and you may have to remove some outer leaves, and that's fine. Once you cross over into real processing, where you're applying other processes and changing the characteristic of the food, then you're talking about applying another standard, which is called the Good Manufacturing Practices Standard, or the GMP standard. So what are the elements of GAP? What does the standard have in it? The standard speaks to those elements which are required for in-field production, and those would be management responsibility, yes, regulatory requirements, meeting regulatory requirements, production siting. What do you look for when you're looking to put in a new site? Or if you already have a site and you're going to the GAP program, what are some of the things that you have to look for regarding your site? Equipment use, right? Equipment that you need to use. Planting material, bringing in planting material which is already safe. You know, bringing in planting material that is going to give you a good return on your investment. You don't want to have planting material that already comes to your farm with diseases on it. Soil and substrates, fertilizers and soil additives, water management, crop protection. All of these are elements of your GAP at your in-field process. Chemicals management, that is really, really important. All right. What are the elements that are related mostly to harvest and post-harvest activities? Some may be indirectly related to in-field activities, but these are the ones that relate mostly to harvest and post-harvest activities. Harvest and post-harvest handling, transportation, environmental management, which is also a part of, which crosses over into in-field as well as to harvest and post-harvest activities. Conservation as well crosses over. Fraud, food fraud, and biovigilance. Yeah, who knew? Worker welfare, quality management, hygiene, traceability and recall, control of records. And then when we look at all of this, we have to have some review process in place as well. So I won't be talking on all of the 20 elements of GAP that are in this standard. We have quite a bit of them, and there may be, they're too much for us to go through, but we just look very, very quickly at management responsibility. This is key because we need management commitment to food safety. We need management commitment of resources to these processes. Legal obligations, management responsibility, resource provision, risk management, internal assessment, and external audits. Risk assessment may sound like a big word, and it may sound like a difficult thing. Yes, it does involve some work, but farmers have been doing risk assessment since they started farming, since time began. The difference with this is that there has been very little documentation by farmers. So the risk assessment requires that farmers document what they have done. They've identified the risks, they have prioritized the risk, and then they've put measures in place to take care of those risks that are considered major ones. Worker welfare, we have worker welfare training, working conditions that need to be applied to make sure workers are safe on the job, and there are aspects of personal hygiene that also need to be put in place to ensure that especially in packing facilities, personal hygiene becomes very, very important because you don't want to contaminate your produce post-harvest. Quality management, we're looking at ensuring that there's food safety policy in place, complaint system in place, that if you have deviations, that you know how to handle them, you put in your corrections, you put in your corrective actions, and you could self-assess against the standard. So we're looking at an interaction of the different processes that are there. Control of records, Lisa said that farmers don't like to have records available. Sometimes, you know, it's a nuisance to be always writing down stuff, but GAP requires that you have your records available, because if you have no records, you can't prove that you did what you said that you did. And of course, always having review of your process. Conservation, ensuring that their protected species are not damaged in any way. Traceability and recall, one step forward in traceability, one step backward. You know what you put in, you know what manure, where your manure came from, and you know who you sold your produce to. You want to make sure that you guard against any acts of vandalism, sabotage, any potential for those things as well, right? So what are the benefits of GAP? The benefits are multi-tiered. They apply to not only the producer. Benefits are they apply to consumers, the purchaser, and they apply nationally as well. All right. Of course, we know there are challenges in implementing GAP. There are additional procedures and processes that have to be applied. There are challenges inherent in the crop production infrastructure, clean water sourcing, adequate labor sourcing, access to markets, right? Not to mention, as we said before, record keeping. But Lisa has already spoken about some of the projects that are on stream to help with ensuring that our producers are able to comply to the GAP standard. And there will be other projects coming on stream as we move further into implementation of the GAP in the field. So for producers, there is a economic benefit, access to new and expanded market. There's knowledge transfer. We're learning something new that we didn't know before with respect to GAP. Improve worker conditions, which can lead to improved productivity, improve overall competitiveness. For purchasers, retailers, supermarkets, persons or organizations that are going to be doing further processing, we have a confidence. We have confidence from them that the produce that they're purchasing meets particular requirement, and that they can freely sell or further process these fresh fruits and vegetables. There are also market brand recognition, wherein you may have a supermarket chain selling a particular GAP produce, and consumers recognize that chain for the produce that they're selling and will seek out that particular chain to purchase their products. We also have consumer benefits, of course, which we spoke about earlier, safer products, improve confidence in purchasing products, as well as an easier identification of the brands that are GAP produced, because they will have their particular branding, labeling, logos, and so on. And of course, there is national support in building the national quality infrastructure, institutional capacity building. National standards allow for recognition. National standards allow for recognition by import countries. They enhance the international reputation of Trinidad and Tobago, as I have said before. And so finally, in wrapping up, let me just say, appropriate promotion and adoption of GAP from farm to fork will help improve the safety and quality of food and agricultural products. In addition, producers can benefit from global markets and improve their livelihoods and the national economy as a whole. Adoption of GAP will help promote sustainable agriculture, contribute to meeting national and international environmental and social development objectives. Adherence to food quality and safety will protect people's health, workers alike, as well as consumers. And this is an important factor in national development as well. Promotion of GAP by industry should be a win-win situation for farmers, a win-win situation for farmers, ecologists, workers, processors, and consumers. All parties have to be aware and engaged in the process. And now how can importing countries, buyers, retailers, consumers have assurance that there's a robust preventative measure in place for production of fresh fruits and vegetables? Since they cannot verify compliance individually, this is where certification now comes in. This is where certification plays a role. This is where NAMDEFCO comes in. And so without further ado, to expand on the National GAP certification scheme, I will end here and turn over to Mr. Christopher Alexander from NAMDEFCO to speak about the certification scheme. And I just want to say, should you need a standard, you can contact us at TTBS at our Standards Information Service Center at ttbs@ttbs.org.tt. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Good afternoon to everyone. Thanks a lot to the hosts for having us a part of this forum to give further insight into the gap and the development of the National Good Agricultural Practices Program. Okay, so as Adrian would have highlighted, my presentation now will sort of try to give some insights into understanding the certification system that uses the recently developed GAP standard and how it will be implemented, how local farmers and producers will be able to follow good agricultural practices, and how consumers or even buyers will be able to influence the need for GAP certification along the way. The intent of the presentation, as highlighted here, Lisa and Adrian have done a great job in highlighting NAMDEFCO's role and some of the activities that would have taken place in the past towards the development of this GAP certification program, and then goes further into looking at the certification system and how it can be developed and what are some of the next steps. Taking some insight into the role of NAMDEFCO, as highlighted here, our main role is market facilitation of fresh produce, both local, regional, and international, along with the building of the capacity of farmers. Specifically, the Quality Assurance Department currently manages or operates the Farm Certification and Monitoring Program, which gives itself a sort of deeper, more intricate understanding to our role in the need for the development of this GAP standard. As would have highlighted, there are several countries which have introduced or developed or strengthened their food safety approaches, which now, as highlighted before, gives the reason or the idea behind now developing this local program that will help us to be able to achieve entrance into those markets as highlighted. Putting the National GAP program into the NAMDEFCO perspective, currently, our farm certification program is solely based on a trade protocol between Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados that has been in place since 1999. Our aim now is to upgrade from that certification program or from that protocol to use the national GAP standard as the backbone or as the policy by which we follow in the upward movement, and ultimately to get international benchmarking against other international standards, as Lisa would have highlighted in her presentation. For example, FSMA, Europe GAP, Global GAP, Safe Foods Canadian, etc. So these just breaks down some of the major activities or some of the major undertakings that NAMDEFCO will have to undergo in terms of moving from where we are at NAMDEFCO Farm Certification to National GAP Certification. Over the years, NAMDEFCO has been involved in coordinating and leading in helping and in moving along the whole GAP development process. Our farm certification program being the main backbone as highlighted before. Then we were also influential in developing or establishing a draft or a sub-steering committee to focus on the development of GAP or Good Agricultural Practices program for Trinidad and Tobago over the years with different initiatives being taken in terms of study, background reports, even the study tour to Costa Rica as was highlighted by Ika. Also, we would have developed our national GAP program as part of the NAMDEFCO Farm to Table initiative in 2017. And as of recently as highlighted, also work towards the development of the national GAP standard along with the Bureau of Standards. Internally, the National GAP program plays a key role in one of our PSIP programs, that has these 6 key capacities or the 6 key activities highlighted here: research and development towards the development of the standard and towards the establishment of the certification scheme, upgrading the farm certification program, moving to the national gap monitoring, sensitization and awareness campaign, training of officers, farmers, and other stakeholders on the key principles of gap as highlighted by Adrian in her presentation. The establishment of a gap model farm to give that training and demonstration facility, linking the approaches or the theory taught to a more practical approach for persons within the sector or persons wanting to get into the sector, and also the marketing, the whole development of branding and brand identification around the whole gap certification, and finally testing, food safety testing, focus on how there can be a building of the local capacity through the development of sustainable laboratory and other facilities that will be needed in terms of gap testing, which I saw someone have asked the question during in terms of the availability of different facilities to carry out these testing. Now we move into the gap scheme or the gap system itself. A gap scheme is simply a certification system that applies some type of standard or policy. So in this case is the National Standard for Good Agricultural Practices, which relates to fresh fruits and vegetables as highlighted by Adrian, without the focus of livestock at this point in time, with the main goal to improve the agricultural practices that are adopted or carried out by producer groups. GAP certification specifically is the program or the approach to applying this standard where someone can be certified, say, according to using good agricultural practices or according to follow the principles of good agricultural practices. There are several countries throughout the world which have implemented local gap system to success and benefits of their economy. As highlighted before, Jamaica would be our closest neighbor who has successfully implemented a local gap system, and Costa Rica is also another of the success stories that NAMDEFCO would have learned during their visit to Costa Rica, which is the TICO gap, which is their local nickname, where we saw a movement from the global gap, the international standard, back to their local gap, which allowed the development and the growth of the international economy, of the local economy, to be able to grow their net import balance, as were highlighted in terms of the current situation where our exports of fresh produce are just a fraction of what we import, which shows the size of the market that is available for persons. Taking a review of the benefits, as mentioned in both presentations before, we look at reduced economic risk through the implementation of gap systems, improve opportunities for market access. These here focus both on the local level, but there's regional and international reach. Also improve safety and quality of the food that we consume due to the application of good agricultural practices. Looking at the structure of the team, according to the FAO, they would have highlighted some basic players that are needed in the development of a gap scheme or a gap system. We have the government or the regulating body that is responsible for the development and the enforcement of different regulations within a country. We have the national standards body, which Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards are that designated body locally. They are responsible for the development of standards specific to needs, as was highlighted based on the survey carried out. Then we have the scheme owner, the person who will own the gap scheme or own the certification system, which will sort of guide or coordinate the activities within. Then there's the certification body, which will respond for carrying out the certification either by themselves or through third-party auditors. Accreditation body that will be needed to accredit both local and international agencies or against local and international standards that are required. And then the laboratories for testing to provide the support to those record keeping and certification bodies, all built around the producer groups that are involved in the gap system. Now that we have an understanding of who are some of the basic players, as highlighted, the regulating body enacts and enforces the safety legislation. The standards body develops the country-specific standard. The scheme owner adopts the standard. The local certification body, which that is recognized by the scheme owner, then use that to apply to certify. In this case, we're looking at the national GAP standard, which will be locally recognized in the first instance, and then benchmarking against international standards to get this international recognition. During that discussion through the developmental process, several questions were raised in terms of how do we move, or several guiding questions were used to guide the process before. And as I progress in the presentation, there'll be some attempts or to highlight the recommendation or the answers to these questions that would have been highlighted. Will the GAP scheme be voluntary or mandatory? What structure would be established to implement the GAP program? Who will be the scheme owner, etc.? Who will be the certification bodies? Whether the body will be approved or not, who will make up that multi-stakeholder committee that would be responsible for driving and overseeing the implementation of the GAP? How will the standard be implemented? And what type of certification mark or logo will be developed? As we move into the answering of those questions, certain key components are needed to be highlighted at this point for the formation of the GAP scheme. The national standard, which we already highlighted, that has been completed and awaiting publication. Then there's a need to have the conformity criteria, which explains the impact, or which explains how the standard would be applied in terms of the list of principles highlighted previously by Adrian, which are major, which are minor, which come out, to what extent must these be followed, what can be exempted, or what carries a different weighting. And then the governance structure, which is also another key aspect that will be highlighted, the certification process and the use of the certification mark in acknowledging or identifying persons who are GAP certified. In attempting to answer the first question, will the GAP scheme be voluntary or mandatory? Based on different discussion recommendations through the steering committee and other advice sought, the decision was taken that the National Good Agriculture Practices Program should be introduced on a transitionary basis, where we begin as a voluntary and progress through a to-be-determined time frame to a more mandatory system. Based on NAMDEFCO's mandate and its role as highlighted before, it was noted that NAMDEFCO may be best positioned to carry out the role of the scheme owner, which answers the questions. Who will be the scheme owner and the secretariat for the GAP committee? A terms of reference was developed by different subject matter experts from both the specification and the interim steering committee that will identify who are now the suggested persons to be part of the steering committee. Both recommendations have been submitted through NAMDEFCO to Cabinet, or will be submitted to Cabinet through NAMDEFCO for approval on the nomination of both scheme owner and the establishment of the GAP steering committee. The certification implementation structure or the governance structure. What structure now will be used to monitor, to oversee the GAP program or the implementation of the GAP program? The scheme owner is expected to develop or to formulate different committees. This structure was introduced or was provided through the specification committee by request to the Bureau of Standards as the leading agency to guide the development process. So this is a proposed or a guide as to what certification scheme or certification structure, what are the aspects that are needed. So we have this scheme owner forming the steering committee, which is the overarching committee that looks over the implementation and the overseeing of the GAP program, of the principles of the standard. The committee has the ability to form subcommittee, both the technical committee and the certification committee. So looking at the recommendations in terms of recommendation from the technical committee along will determine the conformity criteria as highlighted before in terms of which aspects of the standards will be focused on. So it further compounds how will the standard be implemented, and the entire structure looks at what structure will be used to implement the GAP. In terms of should a certification mark or logo be developed, the certification committee will now make this recommendation to the steering committee, also outlining the certification process as highlighted before, and whether there's a need for the local certification body or the certification body to be approved or accredited, which remains optional in terms of the use. It can be approved by the scheme owner due to advice or research on the ability of, or they can use the accreditation body to carry it out. And then we highlight other institutions or other bodies as auditors and laboratories for testing during the GAP process. The structure as highlighted, NAMDEFCO is seeking cabinet approval for the nomination as the scheme owner, also for the institution of steering committee based on the highlighted organizations or other agencies, which is crucial now at this point, as it is needed now to move the whole implementation process due to the completion of the standard. No local certification body is currently accredited to the ISO standard. However, the TTBS certification division is seeking this accreditation. In terms of answering the question, who will be the certification body or bodies? Both TTBS and Keriri labs, among several other local labs, have the ability to carry out different tests in terms of soil, microbiological content, etc., that are required. But these labs should be accredited also to the ISO 17025 standard. Next steps for GAP. Here we take a look at the entire implementation plan or the implementation, the way forward, the next step, the roadmap for GAP. We have the standard that has been developed. Then we move into the consultation and the certification scheme development, which NAMDEFCO is currently undertaking, which will also highlight or help determine who will be the different players in terms of highlighting different agencies and beginning to send out proposals or requests for proposals to engage these persons as different members, as highlighted in the previous diagram, looking at the basic players, looking at the regulatory framework. We have agreed that it will be transitionary, starting as a voluntary program and slowly making its way to be some mandatory for involvement in terms of the agricultural sector. Once the steering committee is established, along with assistance from the specification committee as highlighted by Lisa in her presentation, there'll be a need for the development of documentation, specifics, those records, those risk assessments, tables, diagram, formats, etc., that will guide the user. Beyond this, there's a need for the establishment of the certification body after being approved or accredited. And then we'll be ready to introduce the scheme for use. During the introduction, the whole sensitization and awareness program, key component will be preparation of both the producers and staff or key stakeholders from the extension aspect on the entire GAP program itself, bringing everyone to be familiar with what the standard entails, what is required by certification, and how it can be used for the development or the achievement of different objectives that were highlighted. So next steps for the steering committee, taken directly from the implementation plan. As we see here, key next steps for the farmers is getting familiar with the national GAP standard, getting an understanding of the requirements of the certification body, also being familiar with different regulations as it pertains to agricultural production, getting a better understanding of the customer requirements, and then beginning to work on how do they develop internal controls, documentations, and records. And finally, consumers. How now can consumers influence this entire process in order to say that GAP certification is something that is needed or something that is demanded amongst the population, hence driving the entire sector forward, demanding safe quality produce that is grown using GAPs, even making reference to the GAP certification or the GAP standard in their contracts or agreement or tendering process. Also increasing the consumption of locally grown fruits and vegetables and familiarizing themselves by getting a copy of the GAP standard from TTBS, so how to access and even look at how do we access those type of produce from which producers are producing things that are grown GAP safe. This will now lead us to sort of the new agriculture sector, developed agriculture sector that is built around this national GAP program, where each key stakeholder, each key aspect of the program will be involved: the input suppliers, the packing house, the consumers, the producers. This is how we can pull everything together in terms of driving now the progress or the development of the new agriculture sector. Which brings me to the end of my presentation. Contact information for NAMDEFCO is highlighted there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christopher. So we will now go into our panel discussion and take a couple of the questions that came up. So I will start with some of the easier questions. And the first one is for Lisa, and regarding the maps, how many farmers are participating?
Hi, Nadita. I don't know if Christopher maybe can answer this question as well, but at this point in time, they're aiming to engage 250 farmers, but only 15 has been pilot tested. So it's not as easy as we think it is for the farmers to get approved. But Christopher, you can expand on that, please.
And also part of the program included training for, it would have been a bit, 45 farmers last year were trained in sort of the intricate understanding of, well, good agricultural practices to some extent, and different aspects, some of the key aspects, not the entire standard, but looking at some of the key aspects in terms of pesticide management, pesticide use, and integrated pest management. So we also have those farmers who were trained from a catchment of 50 farmers. I think 45 would have completed the entire process.
Thank you, Christopher. So we'll go quickly to the next question. And I think it goes into the implementation aspects and some of the significant challenges that we will have to find some solution to. Are there adequate testing facilities to satisfy water and pesticide testing for the farmers? And to continue on, are the laboratories accredited or have they expressed interest in accreditation?
So I would have mentioned in my presentation that both the Kariri, TTBS, among some other labs, carry out different aspects that will be required, either soil, water, microbiological testing. But they all will need the ISO 17025 accreditation according to the requirements of the GAP scheme. So, I mean, this is, I guess, an invitation for those agencies or those labs to, one, not only get accredited, but develop programs that might be specific to the agri sector, because they provide most of these services to different industries, mainly the oil industry, the energy sector.
Thank you, Christopher. So I'll just invite Mr. Lookpat, if he's still on, to give an update on TTBS's progress regarding accreditation.
Sure. As it relates to, sorry, just to be clear, this is in relation to our accreditation body?
Yes, the status of our progress towards achieving a national accreditation body.
Right. So at present, I think as many would know, TTBS is the national accreditation body. However, in order for it to be internationally recognized, it requires that it is a separate independent entity. In, I believe, 2017-18, Cabinet did approve the process of separation and it's well underway. At the moment, they're working on a legislative component as well as the human resourcing component, which is next in line. It is it's very actively being worked on. It is one of the priority projects for the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and it is anticipated based on the achievements to date and the momentum and support that we would see this new independent accreditation body come into being in early 2022. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Lookbat. So I will direct the next question to Adrian, and she answered it partially in our Q&A, or the button that falls under Q&A. But the question again is, what consideration is there for organic farming? And that is part one. And then to link to some of the questions in the chat, does the GAP standard only apply to traditional farming, or does it also cover hydroponic and vertical farming practices? Adrian, I think you need to unmute
Muted,
yourself.
Adrian.
I'm sorry, yes. So the GAP standard applies to all types of farming, basically, because there are elements of it which can be used in all types of farming. So for example, worker welfare is the same no matter what type of farming you are doing. Environmental sustainability, environmental protection is the same. Quality management principles are the same. However, if you're doing organic farming, it means that you have standards or requirements which are specific to your product being called an organic product. And in that case, then you would need to use a different set of requirements for that aspect of the production. Because, organic farming will have those requirements for types of fertilizer use and so on. But the GAP standard is robust enough to be applied across the board. But then for specific areas, hydroponics and so on will be different to traditional farming, to organic farming. Those particular areas that you have to look at, those particular things, those specific areas will be different. But the principles of GAP still apply. So food safety still applies, food quality, environmental protection, those things still apply.
Thank you, Adrian. And just to go on from that question, how does the GAP standard apply to seedlings and the production of seedlings?
Right. So it's the same here again with seedlings. The GAP standard applies to seedlings. Now, if it is that you are a seedling producer, you're not going to be looking at that aspect of the GAP that deals with post-harvest handling and so on. Your only concern will be the production part of the GAP. And then here, all those other aspects come in. Environmental protection, how are you, where are you emptying your spray can? How are you taking care of the environment with regards to that? Your water condition, your water source and so on. All of those things still apply to your seedling production. It's just that you wouldn't be using that aspect that would apply beyond production and so on.
Thank you, Adrian. So I want to turn it over to Lisa now. And given the experience seeing the model farms in Costa Rica, the question is, what is the estimated time for the entire GAP program to be implemented? So perhaps Lisa and then Christopher.
Okay, hard question, but I'll try. So the Costa Rica experience, they would have been doing this a while now. In fact, a lot of the farms were Global GAP certified, and Global GAP certified meaning that they're already there. But some of them then just started what is known as their TICO GAP or the National GAP. And then some of the farms who were Global GAP sort of came back into normal GAP. And it was a cheaper process for them. So it does take a while to get it full up and running. I mean, we have spoken about this GAP and we have said that we could probably do it in a tier system, meaning that we don't have to have every single thing at one time, which is how the produce safety rule applies. For example, water. You can't meet the water requirements that is so critical, but we have to start somewhere, and that is the important thing. We must start somewhere. We have a gap and we need to move it forward, even if we have to get some of the criteria up and running while the others are fixed and come on stream and in some point in time. So, but yes, it does take a while. I think this probably took a few years. maybe, as I say, maybe be 2 to 3. Sometimes it depends on how fast they want to move sitting criteria.
So Christopher, perhaps you can, give some ideas based on what NAMDEVCO has already observed or researched in terms of the timeframes.
So thanks to the specification committee, first of all, and that interim steering committee, we would have, I want to say, successfully completed all the background work for the implementation of the GAP program and the certification scheme. So we are at the juncture at this point in time where, one, we need to identify the scheme owner, one as highlighted, and two, we need to establish the cabinet appointed steering committee. And then, which we have already started that application process or that approval process. And then we can begin the actual implementation, because we have the documentations to be completed, which there are several templates from FAO on different CAPs that we are looking at throughout the world. So that process could be pretty quick in terms of developing those templates. Is more or less, well, not to simplify it, but it will be generally to wordsmith a local environment, and then we can begin the implementation. So once we have that approval of the scheme owner and the establishment of the steering committee, we should be able to pick up some more traction and see a lot of progress within the first half of next year, provided that we have those approvals completed by the end of this year.
Thank you, Christopher. So there are a couple of other questions from the chat, and I will just read out the question. What is the impact on the national economy that the graphic of the level of imports is higher than the level of exports in the country? What kind of impact would that make on the national economy? So I'm assuming that the question relates to what type of impact do we expect a GAP certification to have on our local situation?
We have two dynamics. Both Adrian and Lisa would have highlighted FSMA, safe food for Canadians, global GAP, etc. So that's one thing that restricts our exports. We are unable to meet those requirements successfully. Therefore, the GAP program will be the first pillar, as I would have tried to highlight in my presentation, moving us from the Barbados Protocol, which previously would have allowed us access to some of those same markets. But due to their advancement in food safety over the last few years, we now see where some countries are saying that this does not meet the requirement. So GAP will be the basis one to get us into those foreign markets, and even locally, where different food agencies or different persons in the food sector have to meet their food safety audits and their food safety requirements. That the current program that we have also does not meet that. So the GAP now allows us access into those markets. So even looking at locally, as opposed to increasing exports, we can now increase the local consumption due to the establishment of the GAP certification. Because what we are saying is that the local production now meets the food safety requirements or the standards required by these large buyers of fresh fruits and vegetables. So that right there is a direct impact. So once we are able to market and get the market end on board to say, okay, we recognize and we acknowledge and we want produce that is grown according to the TTS 648, then we can now open the floodgates of the farmers being able to produce to meet that. So that's the direct impact for the local economy.
Thank you, Christopher. There are a couple other questions. I'll just highlight what the issue is, the issue of training for farmers. And I think you would have mentioned in your presentation that both training and certification schemes are being developed. So that will come in due course. So that is from Rick from the chat. And also there was a question on if I acquire the appropriate certification, follow all the protocols, is there some way to identify my product as being certified? Example, put on a sticker that identifies it as being GAP standard approved. And that is certainly the intent. So I
So
don't
that's
think
where the
that,
certification mark
yes.
comes in, or the logo, because there will be rules that will be carried out for the use of that, where it will be identified as GAP certified. So, I mean, the rules or the follow-up behind it will determine, okay, what part of the GAP logo certification I can use on my personally branded product versus product that requires that goes through a different system. So yes, because I mean, it's a marketing product that at the end of the day we are trying to promote. So persons, mainly consumers, need something to identify to say that this is grown GAP safe. I mean, persons behind the scene as NAMDEFCO and the certification bodies and TTBS, etc., will now be the ones who have to enforce that. Once you get that mark of approval or that sticker, that you really and truly did meet the requirements, hence for the whole auditing and recording system that would have been highlighted.
Okay, so I would like to close in a few minutes, and there are some additional questions. I'll just highlight some key points. There was endorsement for a tiered system, and there are two additional questions that we may not have the full answers for, but we can probably certainly give some insight. And the question is, why wasn't a GAP standard and certification pursued earlier? So I think that is something, it has been a challenge, but Christopher, perhaps you could give some insight into that.
Well, if you look at my attempts at the GAP development program, you would see some of it started in 1999, right? So it's not that it wasn't started earlier. It's a struggle. I mean, I am pretty young, but it's a struggle that the agriculture sector would have faced over the last maybe 30 to 40 years and what needs to be done. But NAMDEFCO, with key agencies like TTBS and ICA, has been throughout the years trying to promote or put forward the need for this type of system. I mean, we were fortunate that over the last few years, from 2017 to now, we'd have made a lot of progress in the understanding, and then different policies as the National Food Safety Policy and the National Quality Policy, among others, would have sort of underscored the need for it. And I mean, one positive aspect of COVID-19 is that now we understand how critical your food supply or your food source is, seeing that we had sometimes cut off. So it happens now that this may be the ideal time to get it in place, but it's an accumulation of work done by several persons that may not be part of the sector anymore. But this is just where we are at this point in time.
Thank you, Christopher.
And
If I may?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Right. Okay. So Christopher gave the basis of why we started a GAP and stopped, but it was started a while ago with FAO and the helm of that process. I know we went as far as getting a consultant to do a sort of analysis of the farms. All of that was done, and then I think the funding sort of evaporated. And then it was stopped, it started again, it stopped again until it finally got going when NAMDEFCO stepped in through the PSIP project. So sometimes funding is a problem. The international agencies do have funding, but for a certain period of time, and then what happens if somebody don't take it and move forward? So that was sort of it, sort of the background, but we have been working on it for years now. I mean, ever since I have been in university days, I've been hearing about, about good agriculture practices. So it's here. So congratulations to all of us.
And there's a key need for the steering committee being cabinet appointed to ensure that we have that longevity of the program.
And I must say, from standardization division at TTBS, we are proud to be part of the process and in being able to facilitate the development of the standard upon which the certification and the training can be built. I know that we're probably running out of time because there are other webinars scheduled, but there's one interesting question that I'd like to highlight. Will the government use certification to TTS 648 as one criteria for allocating the TT 500 million stimulus package to farmers? I know that has been very topical. And Christopher?
Well, first of all, because we are introducing as a voluntary standard, I would say currently at this point in time, you may not be able to apply the standard. I mean, that's our hope or dream, that the standard is used to be registered as a farmer, etc. But in this current dispensation, to not be restrictive or exclusive, it will begin as a voluntary process.
Thank you, Christopher. Certainly the discussions are taking place at the policy level with key ministries, agriculture, trade and industry, etc., to see how the stimulus package can be, utilized, and key to it would be that training and certification program on GAP. Now that we have the standard completed, we need to move into the application phase. So I think we would have covered the majority of questions. I apologize if we did not get every single question, but we would have a recording as well as the chat. So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone for participating. I think the webinar was very well attended, and the information conveyed from Christopher, Lisa, Adrian, Mr. Lookbat, it has been very useful. And I think that we have achieved our objective of raising awareness of the standard, but also raising awareness of how important it is to do the certification. And thank you for all the comments in the chat. And I will pass it over to Mr. Lookbat to do the closing for this webinar.
Thanks, Aditya. I do agree. It was very well engaged. The speakers did an amazing job of delivering something that could be quite complex to understand. Well done. Looking forward to our other webinars tomorrow and Friday that we would invite the attendees and panelists to attend as well. And we look forward to taking this further. It is a long road ahead, but investment in these platforms that will ensure sustainable growth and development over time for you as entrepreneurs, as business people, as organizations, and collectively for the country is undoubtedly one of the most sensible ways forward. So looking forward to taking this further. And as with ICA and NAMDEFCO and the other organizations, TTBS is open to any one of you to engage with us, ask questions. We are more than willing to sit and give further guidance and information. So feel free. So wishing everybody a good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Lookbat. Thank you to the panel. And without further ado, I will close off this session, but we have created a page on our website where we will upload the presentations, and we will also submit the presentations as well as the contact information. So thank you again, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you all at our other sessions later this week. So on that note, I will close. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Nadita, and
Thank you.
colleagues.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Great job.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Okay, all I'll end.
Thank you.
Take care.
So, thanks.